And we are live, I think, because Zoom takes so long to go live.
Okay.
There we go. We are live. Let's go. Hello.
Hello, hello.
I can just see Norm because we're recording this on Zoom, and I can just see Norm doing stretches and stretching out his neck, and he's just told me he's been doing push-ups because this is Norm's dedication to podcasting, right? That it's what is it, the early hours of the morning for you right now?
It's 3 a.m. and
Jesus.
yeah, I didn't make coffee. I felt that from what we're talking about, like what we're going to talk about, it's my coffee for the day, because conversations really fuel me. Like I that's my energy, like right now. So I think 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, I was just doing push-ups, running on the spot, trying to get my body moving, so it can be here, because
Oh my God.
my life is behind the microphone.
I feel really guilty now, Norm, because I thought it was midnight, and now you've just told me it's 3 a.m., which is at least 3 times worse.
It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. With a lot of interviews I've been doing, with a lot of conversations, they tend to be in the wee early hours of the morning. So this is actually quite normal. And it's just a matter of just planning ahead, like, okay, whether you sleep earlier or more coffee throughout the day, just prepping myself. But don't worry. You're fine. You're all good.
Okay, well, I don't feel so guilty now, but I think we should start with podcasting. So, Norm, or Norm Chella, as your official website says, you're into podcasting. You do a ton of podcasts. It's the thing that we both share. I've been on your podcast, and now you're on mine. And we've got to start with podcasting. And I'm going to give you quite an unusual type question. I want you to imagine, right, that I've never podcasted before. And how would you convince me to start podcasting?
Oh, okay. I had that question brought up to me before, and luckily you asked this now, because I would have trouble trying to answer this like last year, because you would always go with the technical explanation, right? It's like, oh, it's a show and it's like radio, etc. No, I would prefer to explain it through the point of podcasting. Like, the biggest reason why you would want to start a podcast is if you value your conversations and you think your conversations can help somebody else's situation, then you should start a podcast, because you have the medium of podcasting, which is where you have the distribution, the Apple Podcast, the Spotify, and everything. But then within the medium of podcasting, there's one powerful, evergreen form of sending a message, and that is conversations. I went into the world of podcasting because I'm a firm believer in conversations as a medium for anything. It's just that now podcasts are the best way to have powerful, amazing conversations, like the one that we're having right now,
Yeah.
to distribute it to the rest of the world. Now, if that fits with what you want to do as a hobby, as a business, as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, or as someone who really values and wants to share that moment where someone shares like this amazing golden nugget, like from their life story or from their technical background, that made you think, wow, this is amazing, right? And you walk away feeling 1% more energized, 1% more wise, 1% more happy, or 1% more touched because you've heard this amazing story from someone. Don't you think that you would want to share that exact feeling with somebody else? And that is podcasting. So I always like to tell people, like, think about what kind of impact you can have with your conversations and your observations as you are saying it out loud in front of a microphone. Then podcasting is the best way to share that with the rest of the world.
It's quite interesting you mentioned conversations, because when I started podcasting, my first 300 and odd episodes, I didn't do with anybody. It was just me. So Do you see podcasting? Do you see most of the value for you in podcasting as in having the conversations with people? Is that where you see the power of podcasting? Having a conversation and facilitating that conversation and being able to distribute it on the internet?
There is that, but then you also have to have a proper definition of what a conversation is. In your case, since you're doing it solo, what you're doing is two things. You're having a conversation with yourself because you're recording solo, and you're having a conversation with your audience. From the perspective of the audience, what they are doing is that on listening to your episode, which is about, whatever topic it is, they are having a conversation with you. It's just that you can't hear what they're saying. Think of it like this. Like the equivalent would be if, Craig, you have a book out. And I know that you do have a book out, right? Extreme Production. And say that I have bought that book and I have a physical copy. The equivalent of me having a conversation with you through that book would be if I bought your book and I wrote in the margins my notes, my reactions, my responses, my highlights. Now, you would never have known that. All you did was package your observations, your insights, your thoughts into this book, and then you shared it with the rest of the world. The book is the distribution, but the message is in the words. It's up to me what I do with that, right? So in the format of a podcast, rather, the conversations, they go beyond just one person talking to another, right? That's just one of the many ways where amazing value can come out. That's a different form where amazing value can come out. But no matter how you format the podcast, if it's just yourself, if it's just you and somebody else, or if it's just, audio snippets of recordings that you went with travels to a foreign country or something like that, that allows you to package this experience to somebody else, a listener, who will then have a conversation, maybe even a quiet one, or maybe even a comedic one. They laugh a lot with your jokes or something with the episode, and they can have their own takeaways from there. Like these are just all vehicles of conversation. And it sounds a bit crazy, right? It sounds like, oh, it can justify talking to yourself. But honestly, we have a lot of amazing, and I'm sure that you can attest to this. We have a lot of amazing episodes in the world of podcasting where it is just one person talking, and they save millions of lives. And what I mean by save millions of lives, they touch the hearts of people who are willing to add to their routine a solo episode or solo show. And that adds to their overall thinking. And that's the beauty of the format.
Yeah, I think the solo format's quite interesting because the podcasting is by and large known, for most people, podcasting is by and large known as the kind of the buddy kind of thing or a conversation like what we're having now. This is the most typical format of a podcast. You interview somebody or you have some kind of conversation. But and then the other one that's kind of picking up now, probably maybe the last 5 years or so, is the Radio Lab type podcast, the highly produced, the NPR type podcast, which take you on a journey. They're documentaries basically, but there's a lot of people who go to the interview format first because I think maybe they're a little bit scared of just talking into a mic. And the reason I did it, talking into a mic by myself and doing it for 300 odd episodes, is because I was scared of it, because I'd never podcasted before. I didn't know what I was going to say. I mean, I can talk for England, but talking to yourself against a wall, and in one of the first episodes I ever recorded, I talked about this. Talking to yourself through a mic, what is essentially just to a wall, is really, really weird. And when you said it is like a conversation still, even when you're talking to yourself, it still takes such a long time to get used to with the solo podcasts.
Yeah,
I spent a ton of time when I first discovered podcasts, when I discovered people like Cliff Ravenscraft, and I spent a ton of time listening to solo podcasts like that, because there's a different level of intimacy, I think, with a solo podcast, and it isn't replicated across any other medium. And I think this is what's so powerful about podcasting. Even in radio, there isn't the one-to-one connection with somebody. I think this is the key difference between radio and podcasting. People often think that podcasting is just a recorded radio show, and there is podcasts like that, but they're not. They're not really, because particularly in the solo format, you are talking one-to-one with somebody. Even if your audience is 1 million people, you're still talking to somebody one-to-one, and it's almost audio blogging. And I think that's what the true power of podcasting is.
Yeah, it's that 1 million one-to-one conversations. I was a moderator for a panel, actually, trying to encourage more people to podcast in Singapore, like a year or two ago. And I coined the term long-distance intimacy, which caught a few laughs from the audience because it sounds really weird, but it's true. It is long-distance intimacy, and it's the routine aspect of it. Like, can you imagine, like, your favorite solo podcaster? You say it talking to a mic. I will never say talking to a mic. I would say talking to you in a solo episode, like in a solo show. I would always say talking to you, because it's never, they record episodes. Podcasters record solo episodes of themselves talking to themselves because they know these episodes are talking to people, or at least sending something to people. So even if it sounds like they're talking to themselves, it's always in second person, right? It's always you. It's always first person as well. It's always me. It's not always exactly the way that they would word, and you can probably chime in on this, the way that podcasters, especially solo ones, word their scripts or word what they are trying to articulate. It's always directed at somebody. And if there is no one else in the room, it's you, right? That's the ironclad rule of, any solo episode. And the intimacy aspect is the big part of it. Like, if I listen to any solo podcaster show for like 5 episodes straight, or like 10 episodes straight, I've already subscribed. I've already checked out their social media. I instill within me the habit of wanting to check my phone, opening up the app, checking out your show, and going, what's Craig going to say today? Like, what's Craig worried about today? Right? At like, say 9 a.m. and like 9 in the morning, after I brush my teeth, I turn on my home speaker or something like that, and I just leave Craig on as he's talking technically to the wall. But no, to me, my implicit, like the connotated meaning of it is, I want Craig to talk to me at this time in the morning. So there's like that routine aspect that creates this intimacy. And it's just a matter for anyone who wants to start a show to harness that intimacy and to understand it. Because psychologically speaking, whenever we want to hear a show, we want to belong and we want to be part of that conversation. Most of the time for one-on-one conversations or like interview shows, it is expected that listeners want to be the third person at the table. We may be referred to throughout the conversation, maybe not. But for solo podcasters, there's no one else at the table except for the podcaster and you. How cool is that? Like, you don't get that in radio. Yeah.
It is. It's awesome. And I'm reading a book about radio at the minute, actually, because I'm trying to improve. Well, I'm always trying to improve everything, but I'm trying to improve the craft of understanding the things that I'm missing from radio that I could bring to podcasting to improve it. And there's a lot of talk, and there's a chapter in it, and there's a lot of talk about the you thing, about, saying you instead of they, and never referring to the listeners. And yeah, I've heard that kind of thing a million times before, but it is a thing a lot of podcasters put my teeth back in. It is a thing a lot of podcasters always miss. They don't say you. And that's partly why I have optimized, when I'm doing solo podcasts, my entire setup and the whole thing I've got here in front of my face, it's all designed to be intimate, because with a podcast, there's a subtle difference that a lot of people probably won't realize, but with a radio show, they aren't as close to the mic. They'll be maybe just a little bit further away like this. So you hear the slight difference. Whereas with a podcast, they're really close to the mic like this, because the intimacy is the perfect word for it. I 100% agree. It's all about creating intimacy with the listener. They're turning up and listening to your voice. There is nothing else. yeah, you might have an intro and you might have some music on there and things like that, but really it's the voice, and they're turning up to listen to the voice, so there should be nothing between the voice. And since I started podcasting, I've consciously tried to remove the things that is between the voice, be it echo, be it distance, be it the quality of the podcast, be it, you know what I mean? And I've optimized everything to make the voice as pure as possible, as how I want it to sound as intimate as possible, because you're 100% right. That's what podcasting's about. So when people think about the quality of a podcast, and people moan, people like me and you moan about the echo and things like that. Yeah, it shows a little bit less quality or production values, but it isn't really about the echo. It's about that, you feel distant like this, it's not the same. It's about being close to the person, because you don't have the visual connection. You've got to make the connection close through the audio. So it's really important, that intimacy.
There is also a certain respect to the listener if you actually do cater for sound quality to that extent. You don't know in what situation the listener, like, how is the listener listening to your show? You have no clue. Are they in the car? Are they doing their morning dump? I don't know, right? Like, it could be a speaker like in the bathroom or something, which is, some people actually do that, right? Are they just leaving out their on Bluetooth speakers in the house, or are they on noise canceling headphones? You never know. But if you can at least do or cater to a decent standard for sound quality for your voice, you don't have to go full on with like the music or anything like that. It's more on, with respect to the listener's situation, what can you do to treat your voice? And that way they can, edit the settings from their side to control the ways in which they can listen to your conversations. Like, if you have too much echo, then you can't really hear what the person is saying, and then they will just drop off. So that's a win-win for everybody. You want to help them to listen to your show in a better way. I've dropped shows where the noise is just too much, and I feel sad about it. Right? Like,
I agree.
Yeah, it's really tragic. Actually, it's really unfortunate because there are tons of tools out there that you can just stick the MP3 file in there and it'll come out a little bit better, right? Mastered and less echo, etc. It's just some treating would be great. Not to call anyone out, but might as well just call him out. Like Gary V's show, I've dropped his show like multiple times, and he is a prolific content creator. And
he's got a massive team as well. There's no excuse for it.
Exactly, right? Like, we podcasters have been doing this for years, just from our laptops, and then we already have all the tech, and then we have to juggle everything on top of social media marketing, on top of all this, on top of outreach, etc. But he has a team, but he is like recording with like the microphone in a shirt sleeve or something. I don't know. There's just so much noise, so many artifacts in the background. And
he uses his AirPods. He uses his AirPods a lot, don't they? And they are terrible audio quality, even the AirPod Pros.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really used the AirPods before. I'm not really that much of a Mac person, but I've had quite a number of guests actually, who would use AirPods as their microphone, and I'm like, well, I mean, okay, sure, and I'm it's okay, because that's, once the recording is done, I can always treat it later. I just find it sad that if you want to create a show, you would want to commit a lot more to the show to create this experience that you want to be part of. Like, why? Like, the best rule, or the best standard, or the best test to see whether your show is worth listening to is if you are okay with listening to your own show, minus the bit about it being awkward listening to your own voice, because once you're a podcaster, you'll get used to it, don't worry. But beyond that, like, if your sound quality is good enough, then you can start referring your episodes to people who may find wisdom in certain things that you have talked about in your show, which is one of the ways that I do market my show. I always just refer people to, like, specific segments of a conversation on this topic from this show that I've done or something like that. But to cater for that, you need to make sure that the quality is good. So yeah, lots of things that irk me a little bit, but
I think
it's
it's an important point though, because Gary Vee's philosophy, and it's his philosophy across all content marketing, is that it's about the content and not the quality. And it's about making as much content as possible. And I agree with that to a point. And pretty much everything that Gary Vee's ever done has adhered to that. But his YouTube videos started getting better quality, and everything started getting better quality. And I think you can, in a visual medium, particularly YouTube, I think you can get away with it.
Yeah.
But when the only thing is the audio, there's nothing else, you can't get away with it as easily as you can with a video. And even when the message is really strong, the thing I find with Gary Vee's podcast a lot of the time, because it's things spliced together, the noise levels are often different. So,
yes, yeah.
and that's just really annoying when you're listening to one part of the podcast and it's low and the next part's too high, and that kind of thing. So I think it's an important point to mention about the quality thing, that you don't have to get obsessive about it like I am, and probably you are, but there is a lower barrier that you should look to meet. And generally that's just caring enough. If you just care about, just buy a mic, be close to the mic, not right back here, just be close to the mic. You pretty much don't need to learn much else if you can be close to a decent mic. And there's lots of decent mics out there, and it's easy to find that information on Google. But you've got to care about the audio, because it's the only thing between the listener listening and the listener only listening once. I found this a lot. I don't think it's just me being an audio snob. I'm the same with a podcast. If the quality isn't great to a certain level, it's kind of like a 3 strikes and you're out for me. If there's a couple of snafus in an episode, fair enough. But if I'm struggling to listen to it, if I'm struggling to hear it, or if I'm always having to fiddle about with my volume, it just takes you out of the podcast. I want to be in the content. I want to be lost in the content, no matter what it is I'm listening to. If it's a good conversation, I want to listen to it. If it's an interesting documentary, I want to listen to it. I don't want to be having to think about how to listen to it. So it is an important point about quality, even on the lower level.
Yeah, these are all distractions, right? It's not part of the message you're trying to send. Like, you don't want to send the message, oh, I don't care about your listening experience. Like things like echo and things like artifacts that are within the realm of your control. Like if you can take those out, that would be fantastic, right? Maybe next time, just put up a blanket right behind your microphone or something like that, and find a way to get rid of all those things. But and another point on that is what I've noticed recently, since more and more podcasters are uploading more of their things on YouTube, and there are more and more tools where you can cater for a better video and audio combination recording, which is mainly geared towards podcasters, which is pretty cool, since more and more people are uploading their shows on YouTube, is that you have much more leeway when it comes to editing your show for clarity and or pausing if it has a video element to it. So when you start, say, watching the video version of a YouTube, like of a podcast that is on YouTube, people would leave a lot more pauses. People would leave a lot more ums and ahs, filler words, etc. They don't mind leaving that in. So essentially the raw version of a podcast. And I think it's because when you have nonverbal cues, which are right in front of you, you can forgive, as the listener, as the consumer, you can forgive them for not editing that out. But because of the intimacy aspect, when you're listening to only the audio version of this conversation, the audio version of this show, that's all you're going to get. You're only going to get the audio. You're not going to get the nonverbal cues. You're not going to get a picture of the guest going like, I wonder, right? Like gonna get a drink or something like that.
Yeah.
Because these are not part of the show. the only avenue for you as the podcaster to increase quality is the audio quality. That and probably the footage, but then like, interviewing skills and conversational skills are a whole other beast to deal with. But yeah, if anything, guys, take care of your sound quality. Seriously. Like I want to listen to your show. I don't want your I don't want your lack of quality control to deter me from listening to what you have to say.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a contract if you think about it. Like I choose to listen to someone's show. So that's dedicating, some time in my day to judge whether or not I want this person to be with me for X amount of days for the amount of times that you have an episode out. So yeah, but totally, we can talk for hours on this.
I completely agree with you on all those points. And one final thing I want to say on it, I think, with if you are looking to do a solo show, the editing has to be much tighter because there is only one voice, and you have to make sure you make your voice interesting, and you can get away with it a little bit more with a conversation type podcast. And that's not to say that you should, but you can. And I think with a solo podcast, they take much more effort to think about those kind of things. And one other final point on quality is that if nobody cared about quality, audio quality, why did they hire radio people with a radio voice? Why do they do that if nobody's really that bothered about quality? There is a direct link, just like there is with visuals. It's been proven many times before that quality design makes somebody consume something for longer and think is easier to use. It's the same with a voice. If you've got a radio voice, or it's just nice to listen to, you could be talking about anything and people are going to stay tuned because they just enjoy listening to your voice.
Yeah. And another example is the MacBook. It's not exactly the fastest laptop in the world, but it's the prettiest. And when you open it, it's design-wise, it's amazing. And I'm not a Mac user, but I gotta say it's freaking amazing. Like you feel the keyboard and everything. Like I would totally have one just because it just feels it. The aesthetics make me feel good. And in the case for podcasting, the quality of a show gives me a quality experience. So if anything, that's one takeaway if you want to start a show of your own. Also to make sure to batch record a lot of your episodes, because sometimes that you're going to have bad days where you don't want to record, and at least you have a backlog of episodes you can just release. So that helps a lot.
Yeah, the thing about the voice, the radio voice, is you don't. I'm not trying to discourage people who don't have that voice, because there is also value of people using their unique voice in audio, but it is a big important part of the voice. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to sound like a radio, the big, deep, booming voice, a little bit like the voice that I've got. You don't need that kind of voice, but there is techniques and things you can pick up. And it was funny because I was listening back to the first ever episode that I recorded the other day when I first got into podcasting, and I tweeted it as well. And what's interesting about that episode is I scripted most of it. I scripted probably the first 2 or 3 minutes of it, definitely word for word. And my voice was completely flat and all the same. I should have queued it up for this. I could have played a bit of it. That would have been fun. Essentially, it was terrible. It was just really flat all the way through. And then to listen just 200 episodes down the line, because I was doing them every day, to listen 200 episodes down the line, the way that my voice had transformed is just unbelievable. And that wasn't because I had the voice, because the first episode, I didn't have the radio voice. It's took me a long time to work that out, and to work out how to use the full part of your voice and use your entire chest and everything. And you slow down a little bit and not do and all that kind of stuff. All that comes with time. But I wouldn't have learned any of that stuff if I wouldn't have started podcasting. And the reason I asked you the question at the very beginning of this was, how would you convince me to start my own podcast? And I really liked your answer, but I've had other people say to me, don't start a podcast. And I've seen people writing articles about this. Don't start a podcast. We've got enough podcasts. Why are you starting a podcast? And I fundamentally don't agree with that. I think if you've got something to say, start a podcast. And even if you're not sure where you're going to go with that podcast, still start a podcast. Because I still, to this day, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this as well, to this day, starting podcasting was one of the best things I ever did, because it's completely changed the way I speak, which has had multiple exponential effects all over the place, from talking to clients, from doing presentations to people and everything. And it's helped me market in a very easy way as well, because I really enjoy podcasting. I was doing it every day. It first got me into the whole personal branding thing. There's just tons of things. But what do you think about starting a podcast now, today, even though we've got millions of them already out there? Would you ever discourage somebody from doing one?
Oh, I have so much to say about that. I like those articles. I like reading those that say, "Oh, we have too many. We should stop. Don't start a show." Honestly, that's bullcrap, because we only have like 1.5 million out right now, and we think that's a lot, because 1.5 million. I think it's 1.5. I believe it's 1.5. But anyway, let's just say it's 1.5. 1.5 million shows to listen to, right? That's a lot of episodes. That's a lot of shows, right? So it's not only 1.5 shows. It's like, out of those 1.5, how many of those are, hundreds and hundreds of conversations or narratives or solo episodes, etc. That's a lot. Okay.
So apparently,
Sure.
sorry to budge in, but the statistics are 850,000 active podcasts and over 30 million podcast episodes.
Okay. So 30 million podcast episodes, right? That's a lot, right? With just that number, a lot of people can conclude that there's too much. I can see that. But here's the thing. We are only looking at that number within the context of podcasting. And I think that is fundamentally flawed. Because, Craig, let me ask you. I know you produce a lot of content. Okay. Can you give me an estimate as to how many YouTube channels are there out right now in the world?
Oh God, 10 million, 100 million.
Yeah. Okay. We're thinking millions already, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Will that stop anyone from starting a YouTube show or a YouTube channel?
It shouldn't.
No. Why?
Because I don't see, with content, I don't see it as fundamentally a commercial thing. I see it as an expression thing. And I think I see it as a creativity thing. And I think that's more important than the commercial side of it.
Exactly. So if YouTube or video is just another medium to showcase a message, showcase an insight, share a wisdom, then podcasts are pretty much the same thing. What you're doing with the 1.5 million statistic is that you should be comparing it to the number of blogs in the world, the number of YouTube channels in the world, the number of, I don't know, like brands that are sharing content or something like that, right? Yeah. So we shouldn't, as podcasters, we shouldn't be comparing that statistic within the context of just a podcast. We should be comparing that statistic as podcasting as a medium compared with other mediums to show the growth trajectory of podcasting as a whole. Honestly, I encourage a lot more people to start their own show and to not think that just because you start a show now, you will be lost in the sea of other shows as well. That's because, like, in genuine honesty, that's just because people just aren't marketing their shows well enough. That's probably the biggest factor, because we think of it as noise. We think of it as soon as we start a show and we start marketing with other people, you are now fighting with the listeners who have the attention span limited to only a certain number of shows, and then their options are the 1.5 million. That's actually very, very off. Like you only need to capture a certain amount and then it will grow organically. There are certain ways where you can grow your show and then you'll be perfectly fine. Like you'll be perfectly okay. I don't see any of these numbers as a deterrent for you to want to start your podcast. I honestly think that 1.5 is actually too little
Yeah.
and that you should be pushing for more. Like we're only in the first wave, the second wave. Podcasting only started in 2004, 2005. And then we're only seeing acquisitions. We're only seeing new companies in like the last like 7 to 8 years. And with Serial coming out in 2013, 2014, and then now you have other narrative shows, true crime shows as well. People are upping the ante on production. People are exploring different ways to give you an experience through the medium of podcasting, but there is plenty of space for anyone to start a show. And on the benefits that you said before, I had the same as well. Like me starting my own show was what allowed me to quit my job and then go freelance. And from there, I started another show that helped me set up the first podcast summit in Asia. And then I connected with all the experts who spoke there. And these are people who are like CEOs of like companies in like India, Philippines, Singapore, and all that. Like I never would have gotten any of that if I didn't start a show. And it's not like I was a professional radio broadcast background guy. No, I was in fintech. Like, what does a fintech guy know anything about podcasting? But my first show was about short story fiction. I wrote fiction on Quora and I narrated that into a show. And I just put music and I didn't know anything about audio. Like I didn't know anything about leveling or mastering, right? I was just having fun. Like you said, I was just expressing. And this was, I think, I don't know how many shows were active at that time. So it's 2017. I'm assuming it's like 600K or something like that. But below the 1 million mark, I was just having fun. Like I was just doing great. The way that we express our need to be behind the mic is different because you started off with a solo podcast and I started off with a solo narrative. So that's different ways. But we both got into the world of podcasting and that allowed us to benefit in other ways. There are these second order effects like, confidence, voice control, the ability to see podcasting as an industry, to see it as another marketing channel, to see it as another way to repurpose content, all these sorts of things. But none of these numbers should stop anybody from starting a podcast. Because if all these numbers should stop someone from starting a podcast, then there will be no more new YouTube channels. There will be no more new blogs. The reason why we think it's too much is because we think the 1.5 million podcasts represent the entirety of the world. We have 7 billion people. We barely have the market for podcasting prevalent in all across the world. But then if you start looking at the different markets, at least for me, from my experience looking at Asian markets, or at least in countries here, you barely capture any of the attention. So we are in the early wave of podcasting. And if you really want to dive into it, I honestly think that you should start building a pillow fort, putting a phone in the middle, and then recording into it. And then boom, you have a solo podcast. There you go.
I completely agree on every point you mentioned, but there's a couple of other things to mention. The number one thing is that these articles saying that the podcast market is saturated are always written by podcasters. So they're by necessity, they are biased because they already know that there's lots of podcasts. And for me and for you, when I get another podcast idea and I go search for it and there's already one that's doing it, I'm like, oh my God, everybody's done everything. So it's natural to feel like that when you're kind of in podcasting. But for the wider world, you're right. A lot of people don't listen to podcasts, have never listened to a podcast. Some people don't even know what a podcast is. Some people still don't know how to download a podcast. So there's still a huge market out there. It's still very niche, even with the 850,000 podcasts figure. active podcasts. There's probably 3 billion inactive podcasts, and I'm probably a billion of those. So there's a lot of podcasts out there, but it still is nowhere near mainstream in any sense of the word. And the things I always think about is this is a strong thing for content. And this is the thing I always try and get people to think about when they're thinking about starting a blog or Twitter or anything. The thing that everybody always says is, well, somebody's already saying the things that I'm saying, so I can't talk about those. And they always say it in that voice, obviously. And the thing to remember is that your voice is unique, especially when you are podcasting, because it is literally your voice. There is nobody else that sounds like you, thinks like you, talks like you, and puts sentences together in the same way as you. So for podcasting, anybody is naturally optimized to do a podcast because they have a unique voice. Nobody sounds the same as them. Even their identical twin doesn't sound the same as them. So on that point, your voice is unique. Start a podcast. And then number 2 is the depth of value with podcasts. And this is the thing that's not really been touched upon yet, I don't think, because I run a design agency. I have not convinced any one of my clients to do a podcast yet. And I don't know many companies and corporates doing podcasts to promote themselves. That is still a huge market that's still untapped that I can't tap into. And I've been trying. And the reason I bring that up is because anybody who is an expert in something has the ability, and this is where podcasting is unique, they have the ability to record a 10 or 15 minute podcast, hell, even an hour podcast, all about one tiny little thing that is hugely in depth on one subject. There is no other medium that allows you to do that. You can do it on YouTube, but no one will watch it. But with podcasting, because the way that people consume them, like you mentioned before, doing other activities often, going for a walk or doing the washing up or, even sat on the toilet, because people consume podcasts when they are doing something else, you have the ability to go very deep on a subject. And that is untapped right now. So even if somebody is doing a history podcast, and there's a million history podcasts, you can do a historical podcast about where you was born, about a specific period of 1 to 2 years between your age, and people will listen to it because it's highly targeted, specific, and it's in deep in one subject. And then the other factor, which I still think is really important about podcasts, and I still think this whenever I ever discover somebody has a podcast, when the whole, oh, you do a podcast, that was really cool. There's still something cool about a podcast, right? Even though apparently everybody's got their own podcast, it's still a medium that seems like it isn't easy to start. So it isn't the point, oh, well, you've got a blog. Nobody cares about a blog. If you say you've got a podcast, it's still a show, isn't it? You know, it's the Norm Chella show. It's still a show. It's still broadcasting. It still sounds showbiz. You still can't get that from any other medium because they're so saturated.
It's the personality aspect, I feel. And I mean, it does trace back to the intimacy part that we were talking about before. If someone were to try to articulate their message through a blog, you'd have to be a damn good writer to hear the voice of the writer as you're reading this article. And 9 times out of 10, blogs are normally not that great in general. If you try to explore many different blogs all around the world, the most popular ones tend to be in like the top 10%, right? It could be like prolific writers that we know, etc. But podcasts, we're a little bit more forgiving in terms of what you're trying to say and how you're saying it. Normally, whenever you do your first episode, you talk about yourself, etc., what you want to do, and the mission behind the show. That helps a lot in setting the foundation for the listener to have an impression of your voice, so that the next time that they listen to your episode, they think to themselves, oh yeah, this voice reminds me of my impression of them, which is, oh, Craig is from the UK and he's done this. He does a design agency, and he's been doing solo podcasts for so long. What's this episode going to be about? You've already set the foundation because the voice carries so much more than just written word. And that's why I think it really helps. And I think I lost track of what I was trying to say there, but but there's a greater value in being an authentic self through podcasts. Well, from what you said just now, I think it's the remnants of the world of broadcasting that create this initial image of what we think whenever we hear someone say, "Oh, I have a podcast," because we start to associate it with this published audio show. And the closest imagery is radio. You turn on the radio, you have these radio personalities who sound professional. They're telling the news, they're always up to date. They have these amazing guests that are on there. So we always assume that someone has a podcast. It's just like that, right? It's just like when you tune in to someone's FM. Podcasts have that same feeling as well, but it's up to you to convince them otherwise later on that you're more relatable. There's this distance between the broadcast company and the listener, because most of the time you have many different factors that stop the listener from becoming a little bit more intimate with, say, a broadcasting FM, like schedules that are always live, so you cannot miss it. So you'll be gone completely. Or adhering to certain policies that the companies might have. But a podcaster can say anything they want. That's great, because that means that the podcaster can polarize, which is really, really important. You want to stand firm on certain beliefs and missions and messages that you always say over and over again with each and every episode that you publish out there, so that you can find the people who say, "Oh yeah, this is what Craig's been saying for so long. That's it. I'm going to be a believer. I'm going to subscribe. I'm going to follow." You build your tribe around this show, and all the opportunities can come in a lot more. Like, I think when I was starting Pod Lovers Asia, which is a show about Asian podcasting, I didn't know anything about Asian podcasting. I started that show because I was frustrated. I was really annoyed. And I didn't say it in the show because obviously you want to keep up a front. But a lot of podcasting news, it's always geared towards certain countries, right? US, UK, Australia, etc. But what about Asia? So I was annoyed. I was like, where the hell are all the guys around me that are podcasting? Where are all the independents? Where are all the companies that are, getting invested because they're trying to get investments to start a show or whatever, right? I want to know about them. So I started the show to find out more about that. So I was on a clean slate, but I was the only person who had that level of curiosity and the willingness to start a show based on that. It's a huge difference there, right? If we were put into a room of people who are just as curious about Asian podcasting as me, what percentage of them will want to start a show to seek the answer to that? Little to none. I'd probably be the only person. Maybe somebody else might do a blog. Maybe somebody else might do a YouTube show, but not a podcast. I don't see anyone else who is in the same niche as me for this. And if I do, that's great, because then we can collab, then we can create win-win situations, then we can capture the greater audience. So podcasting is a very empowering format because you rarely ever get competitors. You don't get competitors. It's more like you are now introduced to different angles or different opportunities to put in more effort to market, to put in more effort to trying out a different creative endeavor, to put in more effort in scripting a little bit differently, trying out a different idea, etc. Making your show a little bit more fresh than usual. You're always tense, or you're always kept up to your toes when it comes to trying out something new, to make sure that your show is always new and alive, but still feel just the same as it always been for each and every listener. So yeah,
I think it's because, sorry, go on.
No. I was just gonna say, I think I lost track of what I was trying to say, but yeah.
I think the competitive thing, or the lack of it rather, comes because it is you. right? No, I can't be you. I can't make another Norm Chella podcast because I can't be you. Fundamentally, I can't be you. So it might be easier for me to copy a blog or copy a Twitter account, copy the style of something like that. I can't copy your voice. And that's what makes it. I can copy the format of a podcast, sure, but I just can't. You can't copy somebody's personality in that same way. That's what makes podcasting so powerful. And I think I'm going to let you go shortly because I know it is now 3:45 a.m.
Yeah, it's like 3:50. But
I just want to finish on one more point, and we haven't even had a chance to talk about polymaths, note taking, Rome research, and the fact that you're doing Rome FM. We haven't had a chance to talk about any of these, so we're going to have to do another one.
All right, yeah, sure. How free are you right now? Like, do you have anything else after this? Because I'm gonna be honest. From this talk, I feel a lot more awake. Like, genuinely, like I'm always up to continue. But up to you.
The only thing I have to do is order some food. So if you're up for it, then maybe we'll go again. But let me just make this point, and then we'll leave this podcast and maybe do another one afterwards.
Okay.
The fun thing is so damn important, right? This is the thing that when I started podcasting, I didn't get the fun thing. I wasn't doing a podcast for fun. I was doing it. My first ever podcast was to promote the fact that I knew all about marketing and design and blah, blah, blah. So it meant that within probably about 50 or 60 days, because I was doing it daily, within 50 or 60 days, I was bored of it. I wasn't bored of audio production because I was only just getting into that, but I was bored of the topic that I was talking about. And this was a fundamental shift that I made probably a year or two ago now, to optimize for fun first. And anything that I do now for podcasting or content creation or anything like that, the only way I stick to them is by doing something for fun first. So I've changed for now the Get Doing podcast to mostly be conversations like this because I enjoy them and I find them fun. And I think that means that other people enjoy them too. And then the other podcast I'm making as well is one called Free Music Discovery, which is just fun. It's purely for fun. It's just a couple of friends listening to royalty-free music and rating it, and it's kind of a game show type deal. And that is purely for fun. There is nothing else to it. But by optimizing it for fun first, it could potentially lead to interesting things in the future. And I'm always learning new skills doing it, right? So that's one of the biggest, most important points I missed when I first started podcasting. And you've mentioned it a bunch of times about fun. Make sure whatever you're doing, and this is why podcasting can be so good. Make sure it's fun if you're going to do it.
Yeah. I do a lot of shows, like a lot. I have 6 under my name. And I produce shows for other people. Like that's part of my freelance thing. There's a lot of parts of podcasting I don't like. I have to say, like a huge caveat there. Like I'm not a fan of, editing and post-production because sometimes like this, it's important. It is important. But these are struggles that I'm willing to go through because overall, nothing is more fun than having an episode out there that people will listen to. Nothing. Like there is nothing more amazingly powerful to me than being able to share this recorded moment in my life that I had this amazing conversation with somebody and then having that posted out there for other people to listen to. Because now what I felt can be shared with other people. To me, that's fun. It's fun because now I can share that happiness with other people. So yeah, many different ways to articulate fun through the medium of podcasting. So if anyone wants to start a show, honestly, you should start one, and then define your success as: did I smile after recording? If it's a yes, post it. I want to hear, and send me links, people. If you have a show, send me links.
There's no better way to finish than on fun. So you've got about 20 seconds. Is there anything you want to plug right at the end? Your website or anything like that?
You can just find me at normanchella.com. That is my online business card. So all the links to all the things I do will be there. So you have my other various shows, and that's norm.com, which is where my blog is. So that's pretty much it.
Cheers, Norm. We're going to chat maybe again now or sometime soon. Speak to you soon.
All right. Thank you.